I'm Paul Wooliver. I'm the owner of Pinellas Power Products, and this is the installation instruction video for the extended run fuel kit for the Predator 3500, the Power Horse 3500, and the Echo Bearcat 3500. These three generators are all the same generator. In fact, they all use the Predator 212cc Hemi head engine. I will be using the Predator 3500 generator to shoot the instructional video on. However, with the exception of the spelling of the name, the only difference is that the Predator is red, the Power Horse is blue, and the Echo is the Echo orange. The Predator is the one that's marketed through Harbor Freight and Amazon.com. The Power Horse is marketed through Northern Tool and Equipment, and of course Amazon. And then the Echo Bearcat, I'm not sure how Echo Outdoor Power Equipment is going to market their generator, but that's up to them. The kit will come with everything you need except for the fuel tank itself. It has a flyer that tells you that you have bought the greatest thing since sliced bread. It has a positive crankcase ventilation valve. It has a bag with all the hose clamps, both the 1/4 inch and 3/16 size, the check valve for the fuel system, the quick disconnect fittings for the generator and for the fuel tank end, and other hardware. The most important thing in that bag is going to be the USB flash drive, which contains a copy of this video, and it is the installation instruction for this kit. Also included in the bag will be the genuine Mikuni fuel pump, a molar fuel filter, a roll of Teflon tape, a valve cover gasket, a fuel hose with quick disconnect fittings to go onto the fuel tank and to the generator, and a prime bulb so you can pump the prime bulb to get the thing started. When you first hook it up, you will not need to pump the prime bulb every single time. And then there's also a section of Gates Barricade fuel hose. As I said earlier, we're going to be shooting this video using the Predator generator. So let's go ahead and get started. The first step is going to be to go ahead and remove the cover panels from the cabinet so you can see what all needs to be done. This side cabinet, or this side of the cabinet, is the easiest side to pull off, so we'll do that first. There are two Phillips head screws, and then there is a little tab, and all that is just a rubber tab that goes into this hole. So you pop that tab out, and then you pull the front cover off. You notice the screws stay captive in this cover. The bottom of the cover has three little tabs that slide into these three notches. So you'll slide it down, and then these two and this one tab will go into these grommets, and of course the screws hold the cover on the rest of the way. On this end, we're going to pull the cover off the battery box. And that's mainly so we can see to align this when we're putting it back together. This Phillips head screw at the top. Then at the back side, we're going to take all 6 of these screws off. The reason I'm going to take the entire back cover off is not that we have to get this cover off, but it's a whole lot easier to put this one back on if this one is not in the way. Since the job is not completed until the whole thing is together and running, it is actually easier if we remove this entire cabinet, or this entire end of the cabinet. And these screws, there's 6 of them, are identical to the first one. And this end just slides off.
And
the next step is going to be to pull the hubcaps off the wheels. There's a slight notch in the wheel, and you can take a small screwdriver or a pair of needle nose pliers and just pop the hubcaps out of both wheels. So you remove the cotter pin, the washer, the front wheel, and the brake ring off of this end. This end of the generator, you just have the cotter pin and the washer and the wheel. There is no brake ring. There are 2 small black rubber plugs on the top of the generator. Just pull those rubber plugs out. What they do is they cover 2 more Phillips head screws. So you'll remove these 2 Phillips head screws. Once again, they're identical to the screws in the previous paintings. At the bottom of the generator, there are 3 6mm bolts with 10mm hex heads on them. Note these are shoulder bolts. Hold on to the generator itself by the top or the fuel cap or something, and just pull out on the recoil start rope a little bit. And we're just going to let that panel hang from the recoil start rope. Come back around to this side. The valve cover is held on by 4 8mm head bolts. It's a 6mm bolt with an 8mm head on it. Incidentally, I get this question all the time, what is the OHV? That's just overhead valve. This is a valve cover. we're going to go ahead and push the breather cover or the breather hose off the end of this spigot and remove the valve cover. If your valve cover gets torn when you're removing it, the kit will come with a replacement valve cover. During the video, several times I referred to this item as a valve cover, or this item as a valve cover. These are actually valve cover gaskets, not valve covers. The valve cover is this cast aluminum part. It says OHV for overhead valve. So again, 99% of my customers are going to know full well that this is a valve cover gasket, not a valve cover. And once again, the first kits are going to come with hand-cut valve cover gaskets, and as I stated earlier, I use genuine Velcro gasket paper. I don't use some cheap construction paper. And hopefully in I guess they said 8 to 10 weeks I will be getting the official valve cover gaskets in from Harbor Freight. Let's hope so. If not, then I'll have to continue cutting my own gaskets by hand. You love it. You go to grad school and you get to cut out shapes from paper. At any rate, I'm pretty disappointed in the fact that they don't even have valve cover gaskets available. Okay, the reason we're pulling the valve cover off is we need to disable the stock PCV valve so that it has a pressure and a vacuum wave at this port. Right now with the PCV valve in place, it has a pressure and then nothing, then pressure, then nothing. And we want it to be pressure, then vacuum, then pressure, then vacuum. And that way it'll oscillate the diaphragm in the fuel pump. Okay, the way this works is when the piston comes down, it creates pressure in the crankcases, and air goes out through this reed valve. As you can see, when the reed valve opens, air goes out through it, but it can't go this way through the reed valve, and that's how it works. So we need to disable this reed valve so that it gets pressure and vacuum to this. We cannot simply remove this plate, because if you notice, and I'll put this back in a minute, there's air and oil going all over the place in here because of the rocker arms. So it's going to be blowing a mixture of air and oil out through this hole. Then this screen is going to trap the oil, and it will run down through these two little channels. So we're going to slide the screen over to where it blocks this channel, or at least it covers this channel before it goes through the output port. Then we're going to take the reed plate and we're just going to bend the reed valve to where it's always hanging open. And don't worry, we will be putting a new PCV valve in the engine, but we're going to put it after the pulse port. So now it's open all the time, and we'll bolt it back together. And incidentally, these bolts have a 7mm head on them. If when you pulled your valve cover off, if the valve cover gasket was in perfect condition, you can go ahead and reuse it and save the valve cover that comes in the kit for some time when you get ready to do a valve adjustment. I'm going to go ahead and put it together with a new valve cover gasket. You notice that there is a right side up and an upside down to the gaskets. If you put it on upside down, you notice that the bolt holes do not line up. See how far off that one is. So you put it on right side up, and now you see that all 4 bolt holes line up. I'm going to remove the breather hose because we're going to be rerouting that anyway. And we'll just start all 4 bolts loosely. Once all 4 of them are started, you can go ahead and snug them down. The next step is going to be to drill a hole, 1/4 of an inch hole, to mount the fuel pump. If you measure from the center, okay, the next blooper in the blooper reel is this bolt hole right here. Needs to be 2 5/8 of an inch from the center of this bolt over to the hole for this bolt. During the shooting of the original video, I gave the wrong number. But from the center of this to the center of this will be 2 5/8. And you see this metal bracket right here that you're drilling into. It needs to be biased down just a little bit from the center, because that way this hose will be easier to slide on and this clamp will be easier to clamp, because you can have more room to get your pliers onto this. So at any rate, from here to here will be 2 5/8 of an inch. Drill a 1/4 of an inch hole. For mounting the fuel pump. Incidentally, make sure that you put the valve cover back on before you drill this hole. As you saw, there are metal filings that would end up in the engine otherwise. Okay, let me get the vacuum cleaner. Okay. It comes with a fuel pump. The fuel pump has 3 ports. This is the pulse port for the crankcase pressure and vacuum. This is fuel in and this is fuel out. Take the bolt included in the kit. There's 2 washers on it. One washer will go outside. The other washer will go behind the metal frame rail on the generator. And it is a bit of a challenge to get the nylock nut fitted onto the back. Okay, this time it went smooth. Both the bolt and the nut are 7/16. Okay, this is the new PCB valve assembly. It's included in the kit. You've got a hose. One end of it connects right here at the little spigot on the air box. This other end used to go to the fitting on the valve cover. The clear hose is going to go to the fitting on the valve cover. Okay, so we've just fitted it behind this, and this is the charcoal canister for the evaporative emissions, so that it passes the emissions test. We're going to take the clear hose and we're going to feed it around, and we're going to put it right back on the port that this hose used to go on. Okay, so now you can see that the clear hose is hooked on. It's clear, so it's a little difficult to see, but right here is the edge of the hose. And you'll have hose clamps. This hose does not carry gasoline, it carries air. But we don't want a leak, because if there's a leak, then it won't produce enough pressure to lift the fuel. And the way this kit is designed, you'll have a 16-inch dry lift. In other words, the bottom of the fuel tank can actually be 16 inches below the float bowl on this carburetor. So what it does is the airflow goes through this port, through the clear hose. This is a reducer. It simply changes 3/8 hose to 1/4" hose. Goes around through the T, through the PCV valve, and then into the air box as normal. Now this, from the PCV valve out, it's okay if it leaks, because what it does is it dumps it straight into the air box. There's no need for a vacuum wave after that point. In fact, we're going to be plugging it in to the original hose that Predator used, which is a pretty soft hose, so it doesn't attach real well to anything. You've noticed that when you pulled it off of the original valve cover, that it was not difficult at all to pull off. Like I say, it's a pretty soft, flexible hose, because for their purposes, it didn't matter if it leaked or not. This hose is going to go onto the pulse port, which is the lower one of the two that point off to the right. So we're going to put that on the pulse port. And you can take these hose clamps and rotate them if you want to. In fact, I can show you real quick. Here's the way the hose clamps work. You put it over the hose and you'll squeeze so that it'll squeeze together. If you need to undo one, take a pair of pliers and grip one side and push on the other side, and it'll undo. So because of the room in here, I'm going to move these two hose clamps I'm just going to angle them slightly to the side so that we can get a hose onto the other port of the fuel pump more easily. Okay, this completes the installation of the PCV valve. You've got all the hoses in place. Then the kit comes with a 6-foot section of 1/4" hose. You'll cut off a 36-inch section, which I've already done for the next step. Take it and run it behind the float drain and the float breather hoses on the carburetor, and put it to the output port on the fuel pump, and that'll be the bottom port right here. And then of course slide a hose clamp onto it. Squeeze it down tight. Then take the hose, and you can see right through here, right below the recoil start housing, you're going to feed it straight through to the other side. When it comes out the other side here, put it behind this wiring harness and just route it up into this area here. Then we're going to remove, is that easier to see with the camera?
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to remove the stock hose that goes from the fuel selector valve to the carburetor, and that's this one here. And that's just a Corbin clamp. which you squeeze on the two tabs and just slide it out. Make sure that the fuel selector valve is in the off position. If the fuel selector valve is in the on position, you're going to get gas pouring out of there. With the fuel selector valve in the off position, you may still get a couple of drops of fuel. Just be aware of that. Okay, there's just a little bit of gas on the hose, not a whole lot in this instance. Be fully aware that you may have more on your generator that you're working on. Okay, now we're going to assemble the fuel check valve. Because people are going to be hooking it to various different sizes of fuel tanks, we cannot have it trying to put fuel into the stock tank. If you got it hooked to a 50-gallon tank and you try to put 50 gallons of fuel into the stock 1.9 gallon tank, I think it is on that one, you're going to have it overflowing through the fuel tank vent and into the evaporative emissions canister and then all over a hot engine. So we're putting in a check valve on the fuel line. The kit is going to come with a check valve and a section of 3/16 hose. It's only about 1 5/16 of an inch long. The easiest way to hook this on is going to be to put just a little bit of oil off the dipstick. Pull that hose out of the way. On the end of that hose. Now this check valve is going to have one side that's dished out and the other side that's flat. If there's any question about it, blow through it. You should be able to blow through from one direction but not the other. You're going to hook the 3/16 hose to the side that you can blow through. That's it, and you notice it. You can blow through it. The kit is going to come with two different sizes of hose clamps. There are going to be 4 of them that are smaller than the others. About a dozen of them this size, and 4 this size. Of the 4 that are this size, take one and put it on this 3/16 hose right here. And I give you 4 even though you only need 2, just in case you mess one up. That's kind of like with the large hose clamps. I give you about a dozen of them, even though you don't need a dozen of them, which gives you a chance to mess some of them up. Not a big deal. And truth be known, you're stretching this 3/16 hose super tight, putting it onto this 1/4 inch check valve. That's why you needed the oil to do it with. So in all seriousness, it's very possible that you could get away without a hose clamp at all. Then take the next, cut yourself a section of 1/4 inch hose off the 6-foot section of hose that comes in the kit and cut it 1 7/8 inches long. And you'll put that onto the other end of the check valve. And for the 1/4 inch hose, you'll use the larger hose clamp. And then take the T-fitting included in the kit. And slide that into the other end of the 1 7/8 inch hose. Take another large hose clamp and clamp that down. You'll notice that I've kept the clasp from all 3 hose clamps at the same side of the hose. Take a large hose clamp with me. Here's the reason for it. The 3/16 hose is going to go onto the fuel port from the fuel selector valve. So we're going to take a small hose clamp and slide it onto the 3/16 hose. We're going to face the clasps down because this is the fuel tank and there's plenty of room between the hose and the blower housing, but not much room between the hose and the tank. We're going to slide this 3/16 hose onto the fuel port for the fuel selector valve. And then we're going to close that hose clamp. And hopefully you can see that clearly. Can you see that with the camera? Okay. Then this is the hose that you removed from the fuel selector valve originally. It goes to the carburetor. So we're going to slide it on the back of this T-fitting. And then we're going to take the Corbin clamp and work it forward. Okay. And I'm going to face the Corbin clamp down slightly so it doesn't rub against the fuel tank for the same reason. Now you've got the fuel hose coming from the fuel pump, and it goes below the blower housing, comes up behind this wiring harness, and it's going to come up and hook onto the T-fitting here. Then you take a large hose clamp, you put it in place, and go ahead and squeeze it down nicely. Now, depending on the size of the clamp and the size of the hose that it's on, some clamps will squeeze down tighter than others. Just make sure that there's a pretty much uniform amount of force, because you want it to clamp down. And this is a good time to go through and just make sure that none of the hoses are pinched or anything like that, or rubbing against any moving parts. So no moving parts and no sharp edges involved in this yet. Move this so we can get a little bit better light on this next section. Then go back to your original 6-foot hose that came in the kit and cut a 20 1/2 inch section. And that's going to route above the breather line that you just put in earlier. It'll come out here. And that's going to go to the fuel input port on the fuel pump. And then we're going to take a hose clamp on here too. Keep in mind that this is the input side of the fuel pump, so this is a suction hose. So if there's a leak, it won't leak fuel out, it'll leak air in. So it's not dangerous in the sense that you won't have gasoline leaking, but it will not work then, because your system is trying to suck air in instead of sucking fuel out of the remote tank. We're just going to try and squeeze this hose clamp down without losing a finger. Okay. So that hose clamp is on. So now the hose runs above the evaporative emissions canister down to here. And here's where we're going to put our inline fuel filter. Keep in mind that the fuel is flowing this direction into the fuel pump, and then from the fuel pump into the carburetor. There's an arrow on the fuel filter that shows the direction of fuel flow. So you're going to want the fuel filter to go on in this direction. And we'll put a fuel clamp on this. Then you'll cut a 9.5-inch section of hose from your original 6-foot hose to put on the other end of the fuel filter. And again, you put a hose clamp on that. This next section, you're going to feed the hose through, right through this gap, and you want it to come out just above the recoil start cord. So let's go over to the other side of it here. You're going to want it to come out through this area here because it's going to be mounted right here above the recoil start hose, or the recoil start rope. Okay. So if you look at it, it looks like the easiest way to do it is to go just above this hose, which goes from the evaporative emissions canister to the air box. And we'll see if we can fit it through there painlessly. Hang on a minute. I'm going to run it below that because there's a much bigger gap to get it into down here, and it might actually be easier to do it that way. I'm going to say that was definitely easier. Okay, here's the hose, and now we want to go back through and make sure that we didn't unplug any wiring or anything at all, or anything snagged, because this is the easiest time to fix it if we did. Okay. There is a small plug and wire assessment here, and this goes from the throttle stepper motor on the carburetor. These 4 little bitty wires. Just don't unplug that accidentally, because if you do, your generator won't run. Can you see that plug when I'm moving with my fingers? You might need the flashlight.
A little bit.
I don't know if you can see it better from the bottom. Yeah, that you can. This plug here. Just make sure that you don't tear that. Of course, with anything else, if you put it in carefully, when you feel some resistance, stop. So here's where our fuel hose comes out at. The fuel fitting is going to mount. Let me put a clamp on that so we can do this more easily. This is just to keep the recoil rope from pulling in on us. The reason that the kit is going to come with this style fitting is because it goes straight in. And we're going to drill a hole right above the recoil rope, and this is going to recess in here. And when it's all the way in, you're going to get about this much of it sticking out of the side of the generator. Whereas if you went with a brass one and mounted it up here or wherever, you're going to have this much of it sticking out of the generator. So we're going to take advantage of the fact that the recoil rope is mounted in a recessed area. So the first thing we're going to do is drill a 1/4 inch hole through this area here. And I say that like it's going to be easy. You'll notice that that is a steel plate, and that's what's going to make it just slightly challenging. I still prefer to have the fuel fitting recessed in there like that, as opposed to sticking up for you to catch your knee on or whatever while you're transporting the generator. What I'm doing now is taking a repairman's reamer, and we're just going to cut that hole to the final size. I like it to be a fairly snug fit. I'm just trimming off that little piece of plastic. Okay. Okay. So now we will take the roll of Teflon tape, which also comes in the kit. When you're putting the Teflon tape on, I find it's easier to let it overhang quite a bit and put your thumb against it. Now you've got something you can get your thumb and hold on to it with. If you wrap it this way around it, as it's tightening, it doesn't try to unroll it. And we get a layer of it on. Do not accidentally come over the edge like this, because if you do, the threads will tear away a little piece of Teflon tape, and it'll get caught in the filter, which is good. But we don't want to clog up the filter with unnecessary things like Teflon tape. So when you're winding the Teflon tape, go up to the end right here and get a couple of layers on it, and then just go ahead and pull it off. Now we're going to put the now you got the tab, and you can either cut it off now with a pair of scissors or later with a razor blade, so that you don't have the Teflon tape hanging out obnoxiously. What you'll do is just tighten this down where it's good and snug. I use vice grips to get in there on that the fitting because there's really no way to get a wrench on it. It's rounded sides and nylon. The teeth on the vice grip are going to make it torn up a little bit, but I'd rather have it roughed up a little bit from the teeth on the vice grip than to have it loose. So now, when your recoil starter goes back in, instead of straight up and down like this, you'll just turn it just a little bit, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. Okay, so now you've got the fuel hose that goes through from the fuel filter sticking out here. Let's leave that hanging down just a moment. And you'll notice that it's going to go above the recoil start rope. And the housing, which is back in here, is going to keep it off the recoil start rope. So it's going to be about 1 inch to 1.5 inches above the recoil start rope, which is plenty of room. So let's go ahead and put a hose clamp on this, and I'm going to want the hose clamp facing upward because when I slide the casing onto the generator, I'm going to reach in here from the top with a pair of pliers to squeeze that in place. And we'll remove the clamp that I put on the hose or the recoil rope. Let me see where my pliers are. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I will slide that hose onto this fitting right here. If you want to come around this side, you can probably see it a little better. And as you remember, the hose barb goes all the way back to here. So now I'm going to go ahead and crush the, or squeeze the crimp of the clamp down. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and slide this back up into place. Now when you're sliding it into place, the hose clamp is going to have to go up over the well, here, let me just take it off and show you. Okay. Here's a bracket. Have you got your flashlight? That is a guide for the recoil rope. You'll notice that this is really close here, and you'll have to lift up on it to make sure that the hose and the hose barb go up and over that so that the generator housing all goes together correctly. And there's the way it'll look. So now, if you look at it from the side, well, I was thinking it would stick out about 5 millimeters. It actually does not stick out at all. So there's a lot less chance of you snagging a foot or a toe or whatever on it. And now we take our Phillips head screws and start putting the cabinet back together again. We'll start with the 2 Phillips head screws that go in the top. And we'll take our 3 shoulder bolts on the bottom. Then on the front of this, we've got a single Phillips head screw that came out of this corner. We'll put that back in. And we've got the 2 rubber plugs that went over the 2 Phillips head screws that are in the top. And we've got the end housing, the exhaust side. The kit will also come with this fitting, and this is to be screwed into the fuel tank, and that'll be connected on with your fuel hose. I probably should have mentioned this step as I was removing the wheels earlier, but I neglected to do so. What I've done is I've put a piece of 2x4 under each end of the generator to support it so I can get the wheels off. And that's to get this cover off, because you can't take this cover off with the wheels in place. With the front wheel, you've got the wheel lock ring that engages into the slots in the wheel. And we'll put our washer in place. Put the cotter pin into it. And then the hubcap. And the hubcap slides into the wheel and just snaps in place. The rear wheel does not have a wheel lock ring. We'll put this hubcap on. Match the slot on the hubcap up with the slot on the wheel. It makes it a little easier. Now we're going to put this side cover on. This is the last step. This would actually be a good point to take it outside and test run it and make sure everything is good if you're doing it yourself. I'm going to go ahead and put the cover on so that it shows you how to do that. Incidentally, this clear plastic hose, when you're running it, it may become milky white. If this becomes milky white, then you know you've got a little bit of water in your oil or condensation in your oil, and that's pretty common on these generator engines. But with the clear plastic hose, you can then tell it immediately, and you know it's time to do an oil change. So we'll slide these 3 tabs into the bottom. Snap the snaps in, and here is the rubber tab that goes into this hole at the top, and you just push it in. You can feel it snap into place. And then these 2 screws stay captive in the cover in case you're looking for them on your workbench. Oh, incidentally, this particular customer has put a battery maintainer charge lead on it. Yours won't have this on it unless you've already installed a battery maintainer charge lead. Okay, that's it for the install, and now we'll go outside and test it.